switch over now to the last presentation of the day. So I'm going to spend 15 minutes here, so I'll probably go just a little bit over 6, talking about some tips to improve Power Query maintainability and performance. So this one was kind of fun because we put a poll out before the user group meeting to solicit some feedback on some potential topics. And this was one of the ones that came right near the top of the list. We actually had a very close race between this and governance, and maybe the governance one I'll give in a subsequent presentation. So just a little bit about myself. So my name is Chris Sorensen, so I'm the lead of the Calgary Power Platform user group meeting. And I'm sure you probably all met me a few times here over the last little bit, and I'm the president of Iteration Insights as well. All right, so what we're going to cover here in this particular presentation is just some quick tips and tricks to improve Power Query maintenance. So the first thing that we're going to talk about here, and we're going to go through this in rapid fire over the next little bit, are a couple of tips here. So what we're going to do is categorize them first into maintenance tips and best practices, things that are going to make your queries easier to maintain over the course of time. And then what we'll talk about is some performance tips and tricks, some things you can think about to make your queries operate quicker. So let's go through and talk about some of the maintenance ones first. So a couple of quick ones here, just going through these 3 here that you can do in fairly short order, is making sure you take advantage of some of the documentation and organization features in Power Query to document your queries better, name applied steps, and organize all the queries you have into groups. Second, we'll quickly talk about is parameters, and then talk about the folder data source, which is a really nice way to improve maintainability when you start getting into a situation where you may be loading files, multiple files of the exact same type and structure. All right, so let's go ahead and break into the first demo here. So I'm going to go into Power Query here. And so the first thing we were going to talk about was, well, my window flips over here. Actually, one second, I might have to redo my share here because I think I might have should share the desktop maybe instead, because I think I only got the Power BI window, not the Power Query window. That's better. Okay, so that's more or less what I want to see here. So the first thing we wanted to talk about was just some ways to start grouping up your queries to organize them a little better. So you can see here in my application right now, I've got a series of different queries, a couple functions, some parameters. I've got some of my tables which are italicized, which means they aren't getting delivered out to the data model. I might want to start organizing some of these things just for ease of use and maintenance, so I start adding more things in. So in Power Query, we can start grouping these things up. So what I'm going to do here first is I'm going to click on the New Group function here. So I just right-clicked in the open space and said New Group. So I know that I've got some queries here which are facts, so fact tables. I'm going to set up a new group for dimensions, because I know I have some dimensions here, like so. Maybe I'll set up a new group for parameters, like so. And maybe I'll set up one last one for, I think after you see this a few times you get it, and so let's call it staging. So the queries I have in here, and you don't necessarily know these queries very well, is I've got an order date, a sales territory, a product, and let's see here, I've got store names and some status codes. These are all serving as dimensions. So I'm going to take these and drop them up here into this dimensions folder. So I'll go ahead and close that up. I have a sales table right here, which is considered a fact, so we'll drop that in there. We'll take our parameter, this P file path, drop it into there. I got a few tables here that have they're italicized, which means they're only coming in as far as Power Query and don't actually make it into my data model. Those are serving for staging purposes, so I'm going to put those in that folder. And then this one right here is just a fact table as well. So let's go and drop that up there. And maybe just for completeness sake, let's go ahead and create one here for some functions too, because I do have one function. Go ahead and get that one set up, and we'll take this function that I've got here. All right, so a really nice way to at least start organizing your objects into some groups here, so that we can put a little bit of order to our queries. Okay, so the next thing that we're going to talk about here is some additional documentation as well. So let's just go back over to Power Query. So in our queries here, so let's just go and grab, my fact table here. So I'm just going to take the sales query here. On any individual query, I can right click and go into properties. And here's where I can rename my queries and maybe add some descriptions. So maybe I have something I want to say for my future person that's going to maintain this is, got this file, oops, let's spell this properly, got this file from Bob in sales or something like that. And so I can go ahead and document my query by putting some information in here. I'm just going to keep it nice and simple here just to show you it's available, so we can go ahead and document our query properties. Go ahead and save like that. And additionally, in addition to the queries here, we can go and document them. We can actually go over into our applied steps. So we know that we've got a lot of steps in our queries and stuff like that. We may want to go in and rename some of these steps, which I see a lot of people just using the defaults that Power Query provides. So I can go in here and once again go to the properties, and I can say, removed the source name column or something like that, which is the one I removed. So give it a little bit more of a name and said, this is not needed for reporting or something like that. Like so. So now I've got my applied steps, and I can continue to go through all my applied steps and do these as I see fit. This one has an error beside it. I'm not sure what's going on there. Let's go like this. Okay, so it lets me know that I have some information beside it, so I can hover over top of it, and it gives me the documentation in here as well. So I've got my queries organized into groups. I've commented on and named my queries over here in the queries pane, and now I can go through and start giving names to my individual steps as well. And like I say, when I hover over top of it, it gives me some information about that in a pop-up step. Once I have all that here in my view tab, I can go into my query dependencies, and not sure if everyone's seen this or not before. This shows you all the queries that you've pulled into your data model, and I'll try and make this a little bit larger, and how they all interrelate. So I can go into here, and we went and commented on this sales file here, right here, so I can see there's a fact table that I built up called sales, and I can see what all the sources are, ultimately where they came from, and some information about whether these have been loaded into my data model or not. So I can see that some of the ones that were considered staging queries say load disabled, but this one is actually loaded into my data model, and it actually has the documentation that I put into the query as well. So I can see that I got this one from Bob in sales. So query dependencies is really nice to show you ultimately where all of your queries were sourced from and how they all interrelate, and then some of the documentation you put in here is available as well. So those are two quick ones as well. So let's go ahead and show you what one of the other ones was. So the use of parameters is another very nice thing for making your queries much easier to maintain. Let's go back over to Power Query and show you what that looks like here. So let's just go into Power Query. So we were going through and doing a little bit of work with, so we're going through and going to use parameters here. So I'm just going to go and find one of my dimension tables here. So I've got, just pick this dimension table here right now in my path here. So this is just an Excel workbook file. I can see that it's hooked to a spot on my C drive here. But if I wanted to, I could go ahead and parameterize the first part of this file path, or whatever part of the file path I choose, because I have a lot of different files. If I go through all my dimensions and take a look what they're sourced from, they're sourced from a very similar location. So to make this a little bit easier to maintain, I can go ahead and set up a parameter. So I'm going to build one that basically is taking the file path from here to here. And I believe I've already actually built that parameter, so I can go into here, my parameter section, and I'll just show you where I would have built that. So back over here in Manage Parameters, I can click on this, and this shows that I built a parameter called pFilePath. The name is pFilePath, the type is text, and the current value is going to be as much of the path as I want to make static and put into this particular parameter. So I can see I got it all the way down to my base files. And now I can start going into each one of these queries here over at the source. And let's just go like this, and I can go in here and replace all the way to here. I believe that's as far as I want to go. I can say P, and we see now with our IntelliSense P file path shows up, and now I can go like this. And now I've got my file path set to pick up whatever P file path is, which is right here, and you can see the value for the variable when you hover over top of it. And we are then ready to go ahead and hit enter. And hopefully this all worked and I typed it in properly. So now I've got my source file being dynamically set here. And just to show you another one here as well, I can go into sales territories, do the exact same thing, and then we'll move on to one of our other parts. So I can go like this, and I can chop all the way to here out, and once again just go P file path ampersand like so, and go ahead and get that built up. So I have a lot more queries that are using that file path, so I could go through all 10 or 15 of them and do the same things, and then as I start moving my files around if I want to, I can then just easily go into one spot here in my query to in the queries here, and specifically parameters, to actually go ahead and change that value if I want to and manage it in one spot. So parameters are a great way to make your code a little bit easier to maintain. So another one which we can do as well, so let's just go and talk about our folder data source. So a lot of people that use Power Query, especially business users, aren't necessarily familiar with some of the data sources that are available. And a really good one here is the one called a folder data type. So if I go right over here, and I went to my new source, just waiting for it to pop up here, I can see I have a data type or a data source here called folder. And what that data source will allow us to do is pull in a set of files as if they were one file. So just to show you a quick example of what this would look like is if I go over to my desktop and I go into here and I pull open my data file here under sales data, I can see that I've got a bunch of files here under other countries that are all the same, so various country sales. And I can actually hook my data source into this folder right here called other countries, and then people can easily drop files in, remove files, and Power BI will just pick each one of these things up, no matter how many files are sitting in this directory, whether it's 1, 10, or 1,000 files, it'll just treat them as if they're all one file. What I see a lot of new people to Power Query doing is going through and attaching to each one of the files in this directory one by one and building up independent queries, which doesn't necessarily work that well, because then as people start adding more files in this directory, they've got to start adding more queries. So it means maintainability issues on the Power Query side. So you can once again go ahead and set that up as a data source. In my staging area here, this is an example of where I'm bringing in all of those queries, all those files as if they're one under this one called other country sales, combines them all together, and then I can see here in my data set that I've got data coming from each one of these files here. Okay, so that was just a quick, like I said, I wanted to do 15 minutes worth of tips and tricks here for some things that you can do from a maintenance perspective for best practices to make Power Query a little bit easier to maintain. Next time we can go into some very interesting tips and tricks on the performance side of things and talk a little bit about query folding and some things you might want to do to make your queries go quicker. But we are at 6:05 now, and right on time for my presentation here, so I just want to see, does anybody have any questions for me?